Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Present Fathers Podcast. My name is George. This is a very special episode. I am very pleased to introduce you to our very special guest, Nick Freitas. Nick is a man who has dedicated his life to furthering the values that have made this country great. On so many levels, I respect him and have learned so much from him just across the internet, seeing his speeches and talking with him directly through this episode. So, what you're going to get in this episode is direct from Nick, his views on how we save this country. His answer may surprise you on that one. It's not through politics. We cover many other topics like his military service, founding his family with his wife, their marriage, how they've instilled values into their children. And he gives a great deal of advice that is very direct to fathers and men in general for how to take back our country, how to be an authentic man who lives with masculine values in our current day, and ultimately how to be the best version of yourself. So you're really going to love this episode. A humongous thank you to Nick for his time and for his entire team working with us to make this episode possible. I know you're really going to enjoy it. We thank you so much for all of your support. Do yourself a favor, follow Nick on all of his different platforms, YouTube, Instagram, Spotify, etc. He is Nick J. Freitas on all of those platforms, and he has the podcast called Making the Argument. And then do us a huge favor before you start this episode. Please go to your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple or Spotify or Google, you name it. Please leave us a review. We really believe in the mission that we are bringing forward in terms of helping fathers and equipping men to be the best version of themselves possible, because ultimately we believe that changes our country, that changes legacies, that changes bloodlines, and we are very passionate about that. So if you share that passion for fathers and helping men, please go give us a subscription on YouTube and then a review on the podcast platform of your choice. All right, enough from me. Let's get into the episode. Thank you so much for all of your support. We love you all, and we hope that you really enjoy this episode. Welcome to the Present Fathers Podcast. This is the show that focuses on climbing the mountain of fatherhood together. We believe that dads matter. That's why this show is for you. So gear up, dads. Get ready. It's time to start climbing. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Present Fathers Podcast. Our guest tonight is Nick Freitas. Nick is a former Green Beret, combat veteran, and he is a current delegate in the legislature in Virginia. I know I messed up the title there, so you can correct me in a second, Nick, on that one. But he's also the host of the podcast called Making the Argument, and we are very thrilled to have him. So please welcome Nick Freitas to the show. Nick, how are you doing, man?
Doing really well. Thank you guys for having me on.
Yeah, it's a real privilege, and just very excited to get to speak with you on all the things that, really why we founded this podcast, all the cultural issues that are stacked up against men and fathers specifically. And I know that you share a lot of the same passions that we do. So really looking forward to learning from you in this one. So if you could start, introduce yourself and a little bit about your family, and we'll go kind of into when you started in the Army and go from there.
Sure. Well, I've been married to my wife, Tina. We were high school sweethearts. We've been married for 24 years now. It'll be 25 years next May. We have 3 children. My oldest daughter, Lily, is 20 and actually engaged. So she'll be getting married next June. And then my son, Luke, is 17. And actually, I can't believe I just said he just turned 18. He's actually going, yeah, I know. He's going to be going. I have 2 adults now. He's going to be going into the Army most likely next year. And then my youngest daughter, Allie, is about to turn 16 in December. So it was an interesting year for us. My son turned my oldest daughter is turning 21. My son turned 18, and my youngest daughter is turning 16. So it was kind of those,
big
a year full of
yeah.
milestone birthdays. But Tina and I got married again pretty much right out of high school. I enlisted in the Army. I actually enlisted in the National Guard when I was still in high school, and then went active duty as soon as I graduated my senior year. Went off to gorgeous Fort Benning, Georgia, to go through Army Infantry basic training. Was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division as my first unit, and then served in the 25th Infantry over in Hawaii, and then 1st Special Forces Group with a couple tours over in Iraq. But yeah, Tina and I got married less than a year out of high school. and had all of our kids when we were in the military, and we've been living in Virginia for the last 13 years now.
And where are you a native to? Like,
So
where did you grow up?
originally I'm from Northern California, and
Okay.
yeah, don't tell my constituents here in Virginia. No, yeah, we grew up in a really beautiful, nice little place in Northern California called Chico, and it's way up north. And every once in a while you say Northern California, people go, "Oh, San Francisco?" No,
Yeah.
San Francisco is the Bay Area. That's not Northern California. No, we grew up in an agricultural area, um, but yeah, that was our original. We're both Tina and I were born and raised.
Outstanding. So, let's talk a little bit about the Army. You did say you became a father while you were in the Army, I guess all of your children. So, um, how was that experience, especially, you were a Green Beret at the time, I assume, when they were
No,
born? No? So it was all before?
no, it was a little bit of both.
Okay.
So my we got to so I was in the 82nd Airborne. I got there in '98, and kind of went through, obviously went through like air assault school, sniper school, ranger school, that good stuff. And then I was going to reenlist because we had one battalion that was going to Kosovo, and at that point that was the only game in town. So I said, all right, I'm gonna reenlist, and I'm gonna go one battalion over and go to Kosovo. And my sergeant major got like really upset about that. He's like, we've paid for you to go to ranger school, we paid for you to go to air assault school, you can reenlist, do what you want, but you're not going one battalion over. So I said, all right, fine. And I was going to get out. I was going to go be a cop. My dad was LAPD. And I remember coming home, and my wife was like, babe, we really haven't planned to get out of the military. Maybe we should save. Why don't we do one more, one reenlistment? They'll let you go wherever you want, your first reenlistment. I said, all right, you want to go to Italy or Hawaii? She goes, I want to go to Hawaii. So we go to Hawaii, and like 3 months later, 9/11 happens. I remember looking at her going, well, babe, I know what I'm doing for the next decade.
Right.
And so I waited for I was waiting for the 25th Infantry to deploy. That didn't happen as soon as I wanted it to. And then I actually lost two friends. One guy I went through basic training with, one guy I went through ranger school with, very early on when a helicopter went down in Afghanistan. This is like really early on. They were both Ranger Regiment guys. And so I told Tina, I was like, well, babe, I want to volunteer for SF. I'll let you pick the group. She wanted a group closer to home. So I ended up picking first group, and I ended up getting it. But no, we had our first daughter before I left the 25th at Tripler Army Medical Center. We affectionately referred to it as Crippler. But Tripler Army Medical Center in Hawaii was where we had our first. And then we had our other two kids when I was in first group over at Fort Lewis, Washington.
Gotcha. So you had children before your first deployment then?
I had my daughter, and my son had just been born before I went on my first tour. Yeah.
Oof. So this is something I can't really relate to because I deployed and then became a father. How did that change your outlook as a soldier?
Oh man.
Knowing now that you've got little ones at home, not just a wife waiting on you.
There's this. I don't know if you've ever seen that Mel Gibson? Mel Gibson movie, The Patriot. And there's this scene where they're in like the South Carolina, the equivalent of like the local legislature or whatnot. And Mel Gibson's character is kind of arguing against this idea of like being too hasty and going to war. And he has this line where he says, well, this war will be fought on our home front. Our children will see it with their own eyes. He goes that, I have a wife and children, what is to happen to my kids if I go to war? And the guy responds that wars are not fought only by childless men. And it's absolutely true. But by the same token, when you're overseas, you still have a job to do. And I had two kids, my first deployment. My third deployment, I had three. And I remember my youngest daughter, I was very blessed to be home for all of the deliveries. I was very blessed to be home for all of their major first, like first Christmas, first birthday, except for my youngest daughter. I missed all of her missed first birthday, first Thanksgiving, first Christmas, I was gone for all of it. But I remember there was this one operation we were doing in 2008, and we were out there. Green Berets operate, everything is by, through, and with the indigenous forces. So 6 Green Berets, about 25 or 30 regular Iraqi army, about another 25 to 30 Iraqi militia. And we're just doing kind of a check on this one house, which we knew was a bed down location for a pretty bad guy. And next thing we know, grenades go off, the whole deal. And we got 2 Iraqis down. And I was actually the senior NCO because we were doing split team ops. So I was the senior guy for the Green Berets on the objective. So we secured the objective. We're going through, we're trying to find it. And, most of the operations that we had done had been very intentional in the sense that we weren't surprised. We know what we were doing. We, stack up on the door, do your thing, right? This was one where, again, we were still ready, but we weren't anticipating a firefight. And so it happened we secured the objective. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is in that moment, everything was reacting to a situation that took place as opposed to us planning a hit where we were going to go after a high value target. And there was this one moment where I thought that this guy had gotten away. And so we've got our cordon in, we've got our perimeter in, and it's the Tigris River is on one side of this, and this little house right by the Tigris, and it's like really thick. You don't expect it to be this thick in Iraq, but right up against the river it is. And so there's this little hidey hole. I find this little hidey hole, and it's me, one of my interpreters, and one of my Iraqi militia guys. And it was this point where there is no good way to go into this. It's like one way in, one way out. You're hoping the guy's either gone or dead, but there's no good way to do it. And I remember sitting there in that moment. I got all the time in the world to think about it because we've got our perimeter set up. I got Apache gunships going up and down the Tigris, but someone's still got to go down that hole. And I remember having enough time to think about it. And one of the things that went through my mind was, how do I explain to my son if I don't do my job right now? And it was you kind of come to the conclusion that, look, I can either jump down in here and whatever happens, but this is my job, or I can try to come up with, I can try to make it somebody else's job.
Yeah.
And at that point, you kind of realize, like, you know what, I can live with whatever happens next, but I can't live with being a coward. And I sure as hell can't raise my son the way I want to raise him. If I know that about myself. Yeah. So it's definitely hard. You're thinking about your kids, you're thinking about things you're missing, you're thinking about your wife when you're overseas, but, you also, your obligation is not only to your country, your obligation is to the people that love you to be I guess in a way worthy of the respect and admiration that they hope they have for you.
Yeah, that's good. It's really heavy stuff too. I think a lot of us don't really have to grapple with those thoughts. Well, I mean, less than 1% have had to grapple with that. And then even with that, I deployed before I had kids. So, I love the way you put that though, where you had to really kind of weigh of like, well, how can I face my family if they know that I didn't, do what needed to be done. So
well, that'd be the crazy part. They'd never know, but you would.
Right. Exactly. Yep. That's the they call it the burden of command. Yeah. You were the senior guy too, so you can't really pass the buck on.
No, either. It's not without being a complete
really fair to them.
Right? Well, that's the other good thing about being in a unit with a bunch of type A males is everyone's like, I want to go in first.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. So you were in the Army about 11 years, right? So what was the deciding factor then? Because most people will say, oh, you just coast your last 9 at that point to get the retirement. So what was the kind of catalyst there for the family to switch out of the military lifestyle?
It was crazy because I had a good thing going, right? I was a sergeant first class. I probably would have gotten master sergeant within the next couple of years, just because height of the war, SF promoted very, very quickly. It's not, I wasn't anything special. It's just, we didn't have enough SF guys and you promoted quickly. And I always wanted to be a team sergeant. I wanted to be a team sergeant in combat. That was kind of my professional military goal, because I just had a lot of respect. I had this team sergeant named Mike Klingenberg, he was my first team sergeant, great guy, total hard ass, right? But part of my language, but really just made me a better operator. And I was like, that would be, I don't want to be a sergeant major one day. I don't want to, do anything like that, but I'd love to be a team sergeant. And here I am right at that point where I had gone to this course called Sephardic, which was a close quarters battle course that they run you through within SF. And it's a pretty intensive course. And typically speaking, if you've gone to that, you have a very good chance of being in what they used to call the Commanders and Extremis Force, the SIF teams. And And that was kind of a prestigious, team to be on, and no guarantee that I would have, gone to that, but it was definitely an option at that point. And I remember talking with my sergeant major when I had had the chance to think about it. I decided I was getting out, and he came up to me and he goes, Freitas, why are you doing this? I said, Jerry, we just had one of the most successful tours we've ever had. I mean, we got the number 6 target in Iraq. We got the number 1 SOTF North target. I said, and yet I got to fill out a 42-page PowerPoint to be able to get outside the wire. Right? I get all these permissions to go out and do my job. And then, oh, by the way, when we did our job and when we did it successfully, because the guy that ended up being hiding in that hole ended up being the number 6 target in Iraq. I said, when we get it successfully, I get kicked out of battle space because the conventional commander that was running that area was mad that, he wasn't invited to go play along on that mission. Even after we explained that, like, dude, we weren't going to get that guy that day. This was anyway. And Jerry, who I really respected, great operator, great guy. Jerry looks at me, he goes, Nick, that's a BS answer. He goes, if you don't like something, you stay in, you gain the rank and you fix it. I said, oh, that's interesting, Jerry. You're a sergeant major. How many of the problems you've been able to fix? And he had some choice words for me. And at that point, it was no longer Jerry and Nick. It was Sergeant Major and Sergeant Freitas. Right. But he conceded it was a good point. I said, Sergeant Major, the problem that we're facing right now is not with guys in uniform that aren't doing their job right, even though we got some of those guys. The problem that we're facing right now is we got a whole lot of guys in suits in Washington, D.C. that don't know what the hell they're doing. And at that point, I didn't necessarily think I was going to get involved in politics in the sense that I was going to run for office. I just thought that I wanted to get into some space where hopefully some of like my experience or whatnot could either go toward informing people on policy, or at the very least help get the right sort of people elected to where they could have a positive impact on policy. And so that's kind of where we made the decision that we were going to get out of the military, because it's one thing to ask men and women to go overseas and to risk everything for a mission. It's something entirely different to tell them to go overseas and do it and then tie their hands while they're doing it. And then, as we saw with the withdrawal in Afghanistan, which was just an absolute disgrace and a slap in the face. Quite frankly, we have a government that I think uses men and women's lives very cheaply. In the military, unfortunately. And so we didn't get out because we got out because if we were going to fight, we wanted to be allowed to fight. And because we thought we might have the ability to change the way some of those decisions were made.
Yeah. I can definitely relate to having hands tied. I was a field artillery officer, so I was an FSO.
Yeah.
And had PID from multiple sources with an Apache looking right at dudes dragging a mortar up a hill, and we were denied clearance. And I'm like, and then an hour later, my fellow, guys in the company are getting shot at on the other hilltop by mortars. And I was like, why am I here?
Yeah.
My one job is to literally do that. And anyway, super frustrating. So I can definitely relate on that front. And for me too, a big part of it was just family. I looked ahead at what the next, 15 plus years were going to require of my family, even in training, even when you're not overseas. And I was conventional Army. I wasn't SOF. And, I was like, this is a bad bargain for them. I don't want to make my family pay that price.
My wife and I had a very interesting conversation on a satellite phone in Bangladesh because I had got back from my first tour in Iraq, had to go to advanced non-commissioned officer course. Then I had to go to the 18 Fox course. So this is my downtime, right? This is my home time, right? And I'm back at Bragg doing training away from my family. And then I have to go on a JSET because we've got to go over and we got to train, Bangladeshi border guards. And then when I'm over there, I get an opportunity to go to Sephardic, which was a pretty incredible opportunity. And we had an interesting, my wife has just been phenomenal. I always tell people the reason why coming home was so seamless for me, because it wasn't for a lot of guys, was because my wife absolutely went out of her way every single time to make sure that the kids, they missed daddy, but they were proud of daddy. They were too young to know what was going on. And there were other people that took this a lot harder, but not my wife. My wife made sure that, no, look, your daddy's over there serving, and we're serving here at home by supporting him and having his back and praying for him and everything else. And I can't give my wife enough credit for the good relationship that I had with my children early on, because that could have gone very, very differently.
Definitely.
And it is entirely because of the type of woman she is.
That's really beautiful to hear, and I'm thankful that, she was that strong for you and for the family, through all of that, because you're right, that is, uh, not always a given. I know a lot of people who don't have that experience. So, I guess final question on Army stuff for me, and I'll start kicking it to the other guys here is, one, I'd like you to talk a little bit about, what you guys did after the military and kinda how that transition went for you, because that's usually an interesting story. Sometimes it gets a little crazy, but, um the final question I had on Army stuff was, at what point did you start really explaining to your kids, what you were doing or have been doing in the past?
Oh
Because like my
gosh.
daughter's 8 now, so she asks like, "So were you in the war, daddy?" So you're an
Yeah,
Afghan
yeah,
vet and stuff. And it's kind of like, man, I don't know how much or little to tell her, and that's something I've
yeah.
always kind of struggled with, because I don't want to lie to her, but kind of making it age appropriate. And it's always such a difficult topic too. I don't want to be like the type of vet who never talked about anything,
Yeah, yeah.
because I
Well,
think there's a lot to learn.
I always tell one of the things I tell veterans whenever I'm speaking to groups at like Memorial Day or Veterans Day or whatnot is like, if you don't tell the story, it's not that the stories aren't going to be told. They'll just be told by people that have no idea what actually happened. They'll be the college professor. They'll be the reporter. There'll be somebody else that, sat close enough to see the fight, but not close enough to get any blood on them, that want to tell your story. And so it's really important that you tell your own. Otherwise, they'll never hear it. And I know that can be difficult at times. And I think age appropriate is the right way to put it. Now, look, I don't pretend that my tours were like I knew guys that were in Mosul in the tough years. I know guys that were in Sadr City in the tough years. Um, and look, they had a different tour than I did. I mean, I think we went over there, we got a lot of targets, we did our job, but we didn't lose any guys on the team. And I'm so thankful for that. I lost friends, but it ended up being on later tours and other deployments. And so I think it's important for them to understand kind of what you were doing on just a basic level. When they're really little, it's like you were going over there and you were trying to protect people and you were trying to serve your country. And when they get a little bit older, and my son and I, obviously, we've had a lot of conversations. He wants to go infantry. He wants an airborne contract. So we've talked a little bit about what that means and what the job is. And I think, again, I think age appropriate is the right words. And there's certain things you spare them from until they have the spiritual, emotional, and intellectual capacity to be able to handle the story. And there's other things that they don't necessarily need to know. I think they need to know enough to understand why it was important, and why what you did was necessary. Even if, and I've had plenty of conversations with this, my kids all know that I have a huge problem with American foreign policy. It's not as if I think we've all made wonderful decisions. The point is that when we were over there, I still had a job to do, and there's still good you can do from that job. And so I think explaining that is important. But yeah, I mean, there may be things that you experienced or whatnot that are not necessarily things, your kids need to know about. Um, I think that's something to pray about. Um, but definitely tell the stories. Definitely tell the stories.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I think
Yeah, and
Dustin.
Nick, yeah, that's a great point. I work in medicine, and I don't agree with everything the American, medical system does, but I know that I can still do good within the system, so I don't
Yeah,
throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak.
sure.
But I wanted to talk about something you mentioned earlier. I'm going to butcher the quote here, but it's something like "Old men dine in comfort, while young men die in the battlefield." Right? We see that situation over and over. I read a book called "Skin in the Game" by a philosopher named Nassim Taleb, if you're familiar with him, and his concept was that. People in Rome, for example, like your podcast from a couple of days ago was awesome. Really enjoyed that. They had skin in the game. Your generals were often on the battlefield. Your emperors even sometimes fought on the front lines, right? Whereas now our leaders are never on the front lines, right? So talk to me about skin in the game and how that's changed kind of the dynamic. You as someone who's fought on the front lines, what's going to be different about the way you engage in politics versus someone like myself who has not, been in active duty?
I think there's a lot of ways that, I mean, first of all, I've heard some people say that, gosh, anybody that serves in office should be a veteran or whatnot. I totally disagree with that. I don't think it's a necessary prerequisite. I think it can be a helpful prerequisite, especially depending on what level of government that you're serving at. Like I serve on state government. I don't handle a lot of foreign policy. but we do handle veterans issues. And so there's been times where I've been able to use that experience to be able to say, hey, look, this is why I think this is relevant, or why this might be important. So I think what it really comes down to when we talk about skin in the game is really, really trying to identify, based off of your experience and based off of what do you have to lose, right? And like, what is this going to cost you? Thomas Sowell, who's one of my favorite people ever, he likes to say that there's nothing more stupid you can do than take the decision-making responsibility out of the hands of the people that pay a cost for the decisions and put it into the hands of people that pay no cost for making the decisions.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's one of the reasons why in government, I'm constantly trying to get decisions out of the hands of government, because there's no possible way everyone can have, infinite knowledge about all the ways that their decisions are going to impact millions of people. And so there's a certain degree of humility that I think is necessary. And I think a certain degree of humility that actually comes with being in a position or in a field of whatever it is. It doesn't have to be military or law enforcement or first responders, whatever it is. There's a certain degree of humility that comes from actually being in the trenches, wherever that trench may be. It may be the classroom. It may be the operating room. It may be the investment room, right? It may be wherever it is. You're going to have unique experience in that area, in that zone, that's going to be able to inform the decisions in a way that somebody reading about it is just simply not going to be able to appreciate on the same level. And I think that's really important. I think the other thing that we're starting to see within our society now as well is this idea that you can have a certain amount of subject matter expertise and that counts as real world experience. And those two things are not necessarily the same thing. Someone can be academically very insight or very knowledgeable of a particular topic. That doesn't mean they've done it and they know what it feels like to do it. By the same token, there can be people that have a lot of experience doing something, but don't have a much breadth with respect to their knowledge on a particular topic. All right, if you storm the beaches in Normandy, you know a whole lot about what it is to go down on a ramp, run up a beach where people are firing, where MG3s are firing, rounds at you. That doesn't necessarily mean you have the same experience as someone that was planning Operation Overlord. And so sometimes I think it's important for when we look at having skin in the game, there should be a depth and a breadth to that. But I do think it's important whenever we're talking about potentially making decisions that are going to impact other people, either having that experience or having enough humility to talk to the people with that experience to make sure that whatever your good idea is, whatever your thing that sounds good on paper actually works well in reality. And on kind of like a larger cultural issue, what we're starting to see more and more now is, and this is really concerning, I think, for young men, they're kind of checking out on a lot of those things when it comes to getting married, having a family, having kids. And if you have a generation of young men that don't see a future within a family structure, that's a lot of young men that don't have skin in the game with respect to your civilization. And that doesn't mean they're not going to do anything. Oh, they're going to do something. They're going to find purpose and meaning. There's a really interesting quote I heard. I think it's an African proverb that a guy named Rudyard, who runs this show called What If Alt Hist, and he has it in one of his videos talking about the coming backlash. And he says, there's an old African proverb that says that if you don't give young men a place in the village, they will burn it down to feel its warmth. And that's the part where I look at our society and our culture and where it's going right now. And that's the sort of the lack of skin in the game that I'm concerned about.
That's such a good point. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. So Nick, would you say that's kind of what has inspired you to continue to serve our country as a delegate, or are there other inspirations that have kind of done that? Is it a cultural thing? What would you say?
Oh, so serving as a delegate was primarily about trying to get government back within what I thought its proper role was. So again, my faith informs my worldview, and my faith tells me that there is a God, and there is objective truth, and there is objective morality, and there's a created order.
Amen.
And part of that created order is understanding the proper duties and responsibilities and what I call like the various provinces. So you have the province of the individual. What are your individual duties and responsibilities? Spiritually, emotionally, professionally, physically, etc. Then there's the family. Then there's the civic organization, the church, and then there's government. And what I started getting more and more concerned with was this idea that government was constantly inserting itself into those things which were the province of the individual, the family, the church, the civic organization, and assuming for itself powers and authorities that I did not think were appropriate and which I think are ultimately destructive. And so my whole purpose of getting involved in politics was to make an argument for why government may have an important role to play, but it's supposed to be very, very limited and specialized. It's not supposed to be this wide breadth of powers where it's constantly interfering in your day-to-day decisions. And so that's what motivated me to get involved in politics. What motivated me to get more involved on kind of the cultural aspect that I saw going on was learning the, and it's not something I wasn't aware of, but again, experience, having skin in the game, taught me a whole new perspective on the idea that politics is downstream from culture. And we're in the situation we're in right now, not because we didn't elect the right people. We're in a situation we are right now is because I believe a particular narrative has essentially captured most of the culturally shaping institutions that we have within our country, whether it be media, academia, public education, arts and entertainment, Hollywood, and now increasingly even the church. And so the reason why I started talking more about the role of what does it mean to be a man, what does it mean to be a husband, what does it mean to be a father, was not so much to give people advice on how to do it as much as it was to share perspectives, insight, because I'm at an age right now where I have some experience with it. And I've seen where I've screwed up, and I've seen where I've gotten things right, and I've seen what the results of both are, and wanting to share that as part of a larger overall message, especially to both young men and young women. But obviously I have a lot more experience being a young man, to essentially say that, look, this is getting married and having a family is not just a nice thing to do. I would argue that for the vast majority of us, not everybody, but the vast majority of us, it's absolutely essential. Not just for you, not just for your family, but I would argue just for civilization. Right. And then it is hard, and it's supposed to be, but it is worth it on a way that I just can't explain to someone that hasn't experienced it. And so I try to do the best I can on relaying those stories and those experiences so that people will have the courage to take it up and do the things that are necessary, develop the capabilities that are necessary in order to take on that mantle and take on that role.
I know exactly what you're talking about, Nick. I really do care more about the future after I had my son. It made it's a subtle shift where now I've got some skin in the game. I've got a kid, and I need to make sure the future is good for him because he's going to be there. So it definitely makes a difference.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I wholeheartedly agree. There's such a lack of accountability. There's a degradation in morality and reality and truth in the nuclear family. The nuclear family is being attacked on all sides. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that's dissuading young men to getting in a family, because masculinity is toxic now, right? You can't be masculine. You can't raise a family. You can't be the leader of your household. It has to be 50-50, and your wife has to say everything, or you're just a controlling, obsessive troll, right? And so there's all these absurd things, and it's just a complete degradation of the Western society culture and as a whole. And so my question to you is, if America is heading this direction, how do we course correct, right? What are we, the next Rome?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. We did a 2-part series on that on our podcast, and one of the things that we focused more on is everyone talks about the fall of the empire. I'm like, dude, you got to start with the fall of the republic. Why did that fall? And I think one of the things that's problematic, and you see this a lot within political discourse, you'll always hear this conversation about our democracy, our democracy, our democracy. And I think increasingly when people hear that, what they think is, oh, you're talking about your democracy, not mine, right? But here's one of the reasons why I believe, and this isn't conspiratorial, I just think it's based off of incentive structures. One of the reasons why politicians like to talk so much about democracy, democracy, democracy is if it's the key defining feature of the United States, or if it's synonymous with freedom, is because when you're thinking about democracy, you're thinking about politics. And when you're thinking about politics, you're thinking about the people who are in charge, which are politicians. So it's beneficial for politicians, for people to be thinking that the primary way that you achieve effective change within society is through politics, because they're the ones that control the power in that situation. The most impactful thing that you can do to save your country is how you raise your family. Like that, this is not debatable. This is not debatable. The reason why we're in this situation right now is because in large part, we have a generation of younger people that grew up within academic institutions and with entertainment environments with very, very little parental influence on their decision-making process, on their exposure to ideas. And people always say, well, no, parents should take a handoff approach. You don't want to indoctrinate your kids. Like, okay, your kids are going to some degree, come into contact with some form of indoctrination. The question is will it be by people that love them and want the best for them, or somebody else? And your public school does not, care about your kids more than you. At least I hope they don't.
Yep.
And that's not necessarily a ding on them. That's just a reality. And so the real question is that if you want to affect positive change, well, then my question is going to be, what are you doing with your kids? Or how involved are you in their spiritual, emotional, physical, educational development? Like how involved are you in that process? And then what are you both protecting them from? And then what are you also exposing them to? Right? Because, protecting your kids doesn't mean you protecting your kids doesn't mean you save them from every bump and scratch. It does mean you try to protect them from the scars.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want them being forced into decisions. They're going to have lifelong consequences.
Right.
When they're not at an intellectual maturity to be able to handle that. But you do want them to be able to kind of test the boundaries of their skill and their knowledge, and to explore that and to be able to push forward. But you're doing that within that environment as a parent where you have some control over that situation. So you're preparing them to be well equipped to go into those environments when you don't have control over the situation.
Right.
And so that's one of the most important things that we can do right now. But I will tell you this, and I make people mad when I say this, and I'm sorry, I can't stress this enough. My intention is not to offend people or make them mad when I say this. But what I have seen as a parent, what I have seen as a member of the education committee in the Virginia House of Delegates, if the primary source of education for your child is the public school system, you are probably going to run into a lot of problems with respect to the way your child interprets reality, the way your child interprets their responsibility within reality, and the way you manage your relationship with your child. Because what you've done at this point is you've outsourced to a different authority. Maybe it's a teacher, maybe it's an administrator, maybe it's their friends, maybe it's the social media app that they spend all their time on. You have outsourced the significant portion of responsibility for teaching your child how to think about the world and interact with it to those sources. And none of them should be as invested in your child as you are. And so that's number one. You can change the course of a country in one generation if you have enough parents doing that. But unfortunately, what I see a lot of parents, even conservative parents, even Christian conservative parents who share my worldview, where they will delegate that responsibility or delegate large portions of that responsibility to someone else, and then they'll go out and get really super involved in politics. You're not saving this country the next election cycle.
Yeah.
The politician is, you need good representatives. You need good people in politics, but that's not the most fundamental thing to saving your family or saving your country. That starts with the family, and you have to begin there. And here's the good news, right? If you start with the things that you control, like, how am I educating and raising my kids? And you start with the things that you control with respect to how am I investing? How am I running my business? How am I working? How am I becoming more resilient? How am I becoming more physically capable? How am I becoming more professionally capable, intellectually capable? These are all things that you can control, because as I was just telling a group of college students last night, this ideology that has been foisted onto people right now, especially younger people, that is resulting in exponential growth with respect to mental illness, depression, a lack of people getting married, a lack of people having families. A lot of these people that have bought into this and actually think it's a positive course of action, they are going to wake up one day. Hopefully it's in their early 20s. For some of them, it won't be till their 40s and 50s. And for some of them, they'll never wake out of it. But the vast majority of them are going to wake up one day and think to myself, what have I done? I was lied to. It's not supposed to be this way. And if all we're doing is making an argument and telling them, hey, the stuff you believe is a lie. The stuff you believe is a lie. Okay, great. Are you pointing to truth? And not only are you pointing to truth, can you actually demonstrate it in the way that you're living your own life? Because people will hold on to a convenient lie and never let it go if they don't actually think there's a real alternative.
Yep.
But that same person growing up in that environment that just feels like the decisions are just not panning out, and they're looking around and they've got a friend that's got it all together, or they're seeing other people that just, what's different? They will start to ask those questions, and at that point, there won't be any social media influencer that will be able to defeat the power of a life lived well.
And one of the things too there is that they're pursuing the truth that their peers will give them, right? And they're not taught logic or critical thinking, because that usually comes from the father.
It's worse at this point. It used to be that we could argue that they just weren't teaching critical thinking. Now, and again, some people get upset when I say this. I'm not trying to make overly generalized statements here.
Sure.
In many circumstances, what you see in pop culture is not just them not teaching critical thinking. They're teaching that critical thinking is a tool of the racist patriarchy. Yeah. And then what it does is it actually subverts the narrative, the lived experience of the oppressed to the benefit of the oppressor. It is one thing to have someone be ignorant of logic. It is another thing for them to think logic is bad. And that's what we're running into now.
It was the party's most essential and final command. You have to ignore the evidence of your own eyes.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I know.
Yep.
Orwell now is like,
we're going to need a whole second episode just on that. Hey, I wanted to just follow up on the culture thing. You said it was, politics is downstream of culture. And I've seen you reference Nerdrotic before, talking about culture specifically, and him and the group, the Friday Night Tights and that kind of stuff. They talk a lot about how really the early warning signs of all this stuff is in movies, is in games. And, as conservative Christians, that's an arena we have totally failed in. We have stuck out. Oh, that's child's play. That's kids stuff, comic books and all that kind of stuff. And not to get all nerdy or whatever, but kids like that stuff, right?
Oh, yeah.
They're watching cartoons, they're watching movies. And so we have totally given up this arena where the other side, where, they're saying, don't believe your eyes, has co-opted that entire system. And so it's no surprise that you've got an entire generation now that's been brought up watching all these shows and movies and games, espousing all these woke ideologies. And parents are totally blindsided by it. And it's like, well, this is why you need to pay attention to what they're playing or watching or listening to.
It has gotten so easy
because they even like the schools, they're definitely trying to inject this into childhood stuff.
Yeah.
Because they can
I just did a FOIA request for schools in my district based off of books they have in their library, and I have just found some that I'm telling you right now, there's going to be some issues. And I'm not talking about some, edgy literature. No, I'm talking about blatant pornographic imagery. So yeah, if you're not sitting there and watching shows with your kids and not understanding what it is that they're consuming on a regular basis, that's very problematic. Now, here's the good news, right? Because so much of this sounds like doom and gloom. The good news is that if you are actually taking that time with your kids, and I don't mean like sheltering them and not letting them watch anything except, I don't know, 80s Christian movies, which were
Veggie Tales, only Veggie Tales.
Bluey, just Bluey.
Bluey's good, yeah.
We watch Star Wars with our kids. We watch John Wayne with our kids.
Well, there's 3 Star Wars movies, just to be clear.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely correct. There's 3
Go
Star
Jar Jar
Wars
Binks.
movies, and there's 3 more where it's like, and then there's the travesty that we will not even mention.
There's Star Wars, and then there's Disney Star Wars.
Yes, yeah. But so my son and I, we used to love watching those, and I watch, and then with my girls, I'll tell you one of the greatest decisions my wife and I ever made, and we made it totally accidentally, was when I was still in the service. We had, for a while, we did this thing where whenever I was going to be gone for a while, we'd each pick a book. We got turns picking a book, and, but it had to be a classic. That was the rule. It had to be a classic. So I picked something cool like The Count of Monte Cristo, and we both read that when we were apart, and we would like get on the phone and talk about it. And then she picked Pride and Prejudice. Dude, Jane Austen is brilliant. Like, I'm not even like, I give no apologies. Jane Austen is brilliant. Pride and Prejudice, Sense and Sensibility. I mean, let me tell you how bad this got. And I promise this is going somewhere. I was at an Irish pub in Colorado Springs with like SF buddies, military buddies, the whole deal. And they were having trivia night, right? They're having trivia night, and we're just sitting there. We'd had a long day at work, and we're having a Guinness, right? Having a Guinness, sitting there, and we're all sitting there not paying attention. And all of a sudden on the trivia, it comes up and goes, name the Jane Austen books that don't have "and" in the title. And I'm looking around, and everybody's scratching their head. And I walk over to this table. There's a bunch of ladies sitting there. I'm like, it's Emma, Northanger Abbey, and Mansfield Park, and I was never here. And I walk back over. But the reason I point this out is because when my kids were little, right? When your kids are little, they want to do and they want to watch what mom and dad are doing if you give them the time. It is fascinating how much time your kids want to spend with you and not with Blue's Clues or whatever else, Paw Patrol, if you want to sit down and have the time with them. And so my girls they watch BBC adaptations of Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility. And I'll never forget when she was 12 at the time, my oldest daughter, she's watching this other show and this man and woman kiss. And she goes, Daddy, I'm like, what? She goes, did you see that? What did I see? What? They just kissed. Yeah. She's going to lose her character. They're not engaged. And I was like, that is an excellent point.
Oh my God. Yes.
Spot on. She's like, no, you can't do that. Did you and mommy kiss before you were engaged? Who wants ice cream? Right?
Never.
The point is that you can have these shared experiences with your kids, which transcend. You hear this all the time, like, oh, it's a generational thing. Some of my kids' favorite shows growing up was I Love Lucy, Little House on the Prairie, Gilligan's Island. And we would watch this together, and they thought it was hysterical. They loved it. They never thought for a moment they were missing out on anything. But the value system were very different. Not to say it was always perfect, right? Not all the values in those old movies are perfect, but it's certainly not what you're getting on, again, Paw Patrol today. And so sitting down and actually investing in that time on the entertainment sphere, your kids will develop kind of an idea of what is fun, in part based off of what they got to do with you. And so, again, my daughter was in a play the other day. My 15-year-old daughter, she's in a play, and they're all sitting around talking about what they were doing. Like, oh, I went to the movies. Oh, I hung out with friends. She's like, I castrated my goat. By the way, guys, if you really want to scare potential suitors for your boys, get your daughter a goat, and then
yes.
Anyways,
Noted.
it's just to say
Yes.
this is not an issue where you've got to sit there and just be Nurse Ratchet the entire time. Like, oh, you can't have that. You can't do that. Put that away. You can't have it. No. Pick fun things to do with your kids, build those experiences with those kids, and you'll be shocked at how their idea of fun is so drastically different from any of their friends that were essentially raised by a tablet or raised by their peers within a public school environment.
Yeah, in the public school environment, it kind of adds, and not to upset people, but it does add to the problems. But to go back to what you're talking about, like with the nuclear family, and our responsibility as not only fathers, but the mothers as well, and being a parent, I guess my question to you would be, how can we kind of counter some of this culture besides, or what's the best way to, I guess, teach our children to fight things like wokeism and to fight things like term limits and all the issues that we have going on in society today. I mean, we have so many different issues that are actually hitting us all at once that even as adults, we're like, how do we fight this? So I guess the question is, like, how do we teach our children what they need to know in order to change the next generation's outcome?
Yeah. Well, first of all, the dumbest statement ever uttered in Western civilization, well, I should say the dumbest, we'll put it in the top 100, right? Is you shouldn't talk about religion and politics. Religion and politics are going to affect a significant portion of your children's life one way or the other. And so you better talk about it and you better prepare them. The one thing that I try to encourage parents is to say that a lot of conservative and Christian parents think that they've taught their children how to think and what they believe, when in reality, what they've taught them is an incentive structure. You go to church and you behave, you listen to mom and dad, you repeat what mom and dad say about politics or about life or about values, because when you do that, you're rewarded, right? When you don't do that, you're punished. And so what you've taught them is kind of like this arbitrary respect for authority. And so that works out fine maybe when they're under your roof. What happens when it's a college professor is the authority figure now? What happens when it's a boss? What happens when it's a friend group? What happens when it's some sort of celebrity that they admire?
The media.
The media, that becomes the authority now. And so one of the most important things that you can do is teach your kids how to think, and then teach them why you think the way you do about things. And then the next step for that, there's two next steps. One is at some point you will do something. Your kid will catch you violating the rule that you told them was important. And at that point, what they're determining is the rule sacred in the sense that it applies to you as well, or is the rule arbitrary based off of who's in power? Because if your kid comes to you because they've caught you, using a word you shouldn't have used, or overreacting to something, or not thinking something through before you commented, and they respectfully, this part's important, they respectfully come to you and say, Dad, I don't think you handled that well. Can I talk to you about it? In that moment, every ounce of, because this has happened to me, every ounce of me wanted to be like, oh, you don't approve of the way the person that is feeding and clothing and housing you did something. Oh, well, do tell what from your 14 years of experience has equipped you to be able to provide this sort of analysis. Well, the answer is you equipped him to provide that sort of analysis.
Do you mind sharing an example? Just
yeah, sure. I've shared this one before. I came home from work. I was really tired. I was frustrated. I was stressed out. I walk into the kitchen and my two youngest kids have just destroyed the kitchen. And this would not be the first time my two youngest kids have destroyed the kitchen. And I was angry. I was like, what are you doing? Again, a lot of time in the military, a lot of time training. I can project, right? Like, what are you doing? Put that down, clean all that up, go to your room. I'm done. I don't want to. And they started to try to explain, right? Like, I don't want to hear it. Just do what I say, go to your room. I go back upstairs. My oldest daughter knocks on the door. Daddy, can I talk to you for a second? Yeah, sweetheart, what is it? Daddy, I don't think you handled that very well. Okay. What do you mean? Daddy, the reason why they were in the kitchen is because mommy told them that they could make something for you. And so they were down there and they were doing their best trying to bake something for you that they knew that you would like. And when you saw the mess and you got mad at them, now they're too afraid to tell you that that's what they were doing and why. And I remember sitting there and first of all, you're feeling like an absolute jerk because, your kids were trying to do something nice for you and you flew out the handle. Then you feel like an idiot because now you had to have your 14-year-old daughter correct you. Then you feel even worse because she's right. and there, but by the grace of God go I, because there have been times where, I've told my kids, hey, I'm too busy, whatever. But I remember in that moment thinking she had the courage to come and knock on the door and ask to talk to me. She saw that I was in a bad mood. I could have very easily told her to go to her room too. She had the courage to challenge an authority figure in her life that she respects. She did it respectfully. The analysis that she used of my behavior and their motivation and the circumstances was spot on. I said, in this moment, one of two things is going to happen. I'm either going to reinforce to my daughter that the authority that I wield in this household is not arbitrary and that the rules that we enforce also apply to me, or I'm going to teach her that I'm just some sort of tyrant and you just better do what I say, and that's it. And so I remember looking at her, I said, sweetheart, I want to thank you for coming to me. I want to thank you for doing it respectfully. You are absolutely right. I'm wrong. And I'm going to go apologize to your brother and sister. But I want to thank you for having the courage to do that. And I have, like, to this day, I have a very, very good relationship, or whenever my daughter is struggling with something or thinking through something or whatnot, we'll sit there and we'll talk about it. And I think it's really important, especially if you come from a Christian worldview, and I do. The authority I have as the head of my household doesn't come from me.
Exactly.
It doesn't come from me. I am a caretaker of that authority.
Yep.
My job is to utilize and exercise it in a way where my primary concern is the well-being of my wife and my children, even at the expense of my own well-being, should the circumstances of the situation call for it. And what I need them to understand about the rules that we come about is they're not rules because mommy and daddy says so. They're rules because there is a God and there is a created order. And these have been put in place for our well-being and our benefit. And our job as a father and our job as parents is to help you understand that they exist, why they exist, and why they're actually beneficial for you. But if the moment they see us violating it, they can't respectfully bring correction at the appropriate time, well, then we've taught them it's none of that. It's just, I'm in charge. I'm bigger than you. I make the money, whatever it is. I'm in charge. Do what I say. And that is the last lesson that you want your kids to leave the house. So anyways, that's one of the ways that I think you equip your children. The other thing, so that's the fundamental, right? The fundamental thing is to teach them the why the, objective morality, objective truth exists. That's built into our faith. And then it's about how to think and how to think well. And when you ask your kids questions and you give them scenarios and you give them things to think through at the dinner table or whatever else, that doesn't really, it becomes like a game of, okay, how would you respond in this situation? Or okay, if someone said this, what would you say back? And when you start to develop that sort of communication with your kids, now when they find themselves in situations, many times they know how to answer. And then the times that they don't, the first person they come and ask is you. And that's what you want. You want them asking you, not TikTok. And so when you've established that relationship, that dialogue, and that process of going back and forth, and they see it as a beneficial thing and as a fun thing, then they'll do it more. And that's what you want. You want, when those difficult situations come, you want them to be prepared. And when they don't feel prepared, you want them to come to you to get prepared. And at the times when you maybe don't know the answer, you don't make something up. You just say, that's a really interesting, let's think about that. Let's look about that. Let's consider it together. And that's what you always want, because when they go to college or when they go off into the workforce or the military or whatever else it is, and they're faced with problematic situations, you still want to be seen as not only a safe harbor, but you want to be able to seen as someone that will give them wise advice. And so, yeah.
That's so good, man.
Yeah.
And
TikTok, AKA China, by the way.
Yeah.
Putting that in there.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure they have our best interests in mind.
Yeah. No doubt.
So you gave a great example of, I don't know if you ever read the book called Tender Warrior, but kind of that, highly recommend you should read that book, written by a Green Beret who became a pastor after Vietnam.
Okay.
But great book. But you were talking there about how, we are the protector, but we also need to be tender in those moments. Great example of that with your daughter there. Just an amazing thing that everyone can kind of probably have a very similar experience already. And they're, if they're a dad, they've had a similar situation and they either handled it right or they didn't. And so the beauty is you can learn from it and do better. So thanks for giving that very personal example. Can we flip to the other end of the spectrum now, where you need to be the warrior?
Yeah.
You've made some videos about how dads need to be dangerous. Can you get into that? Because I think, especially for Christian men, a lot of Christian men, they're very meek, and there are times where you need to be a lion. And it's a balance. That's why the Tender Warrior book is so good. It's all, biblically based, but I'd love to hear your perspective on, especially in today's day and age where it seems like, you're treated like a total knuckle dragging brute if you even dare to be a protector.
Yeah, until you're needed.
Exactly. Right. Until society needs you. But when it comes to your family, how dare you stand up for them?
Yeah, I haven't been in too many dangerous or violent situations when somebody picked up the phone and called the nearest gender studies major to show up and deal with. So I think one of the important things for men to understand is that to be a warrior in the context of being a husband and father doesn't mean, Conan. I'm very sorry that there's coming a day very soon when that reference won't actually have the same cultural meaning, but it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean John Wick, although that would be cool. It basically means that you take seriously that you do need to maintain a certain degree of, if you're able, like I always have to caveat this because someone will say like, oh, so a dad in a wheelchair can't be like, okay, clearly we're not talking about situations where somebody has a debilitating,
the letter of the law. Yeah.
But if you're a husband, like the moment you decide I'm going to be a husband, if you don't look at that as I am now responsible for the physical safety of somebody else, I think there is something flawed in your reasoning. And I had a situation once where I was talking with a young woman who was engaged, very well educated. And I was just telling her, like, oh, I love being married. Being married is great. Congratulations. And we were talking a little bit about, roles in marriage. And she goes, oh, we don't subscribe to those traditional gender roles. I said, oh, that's fascinating. Can I ask you a question? She goes, yeah. I said, let's say you and your fiance, we're here in DC. You and your fiance just went out to a nice dinner. You're walking back to the car, and then all of a sudden a guy jumps out of the alleyway with a knife. Now, in one of these scenarios, your fiance jumps in front of you, and in the other scenario, he jumps behind you. In which scenario are you more attracted to your fiance? And she goes, that's not fair. I'm like, oh, I guess you just answered the question, didn't you? I said, look, can we just stop playing make-believe? You don't expect your man to be Conan. You don't expect him to be, the Rock, right? You don't expect all that. That's fine. That's not a reasonable expectation. You do expect your man to protect and defend you. You want him to. And in fact, if you don't have that expectation because you don't think he can, I guarantee you there's going to be an element of respect missing from your marriage that is not going to bode well for the relationship. By the same token, young men get mad at me sometimes when I put a lot of onus and responsibility, because I'll hear a lot of men nowadays talking about like, oh, it's just too hard to find a wife and it's just do this and just do that. I'm like, I get it. Like, let me acknowledge up front that culture has drastically changed the way many women see men and their responsibilities and their role within society. There's no question about that. Like I can definitely appreciate that that's problematic. Do you know what the solution is to it? Yeah. Strong men. Like, I don't know what to tell you. The answer is always the same: strong men. So part of your responsibility, if you want to actually have a wife, if you actually want to have kids, is you need to stay in a reasonable level of physical shape, and you need to have the mental capacity and the mental capability to engage in violence when necessary, right? Not going around picking fights or anything like that. But if your wife honestly doesn't think you could protect her in a fight, there's something wrong, dude. There's something wrong. Every kid wants to be able to tell their buddy, my daddy could beat up your daddy. Not because they actually want their dads to fight, but because they want to be proud that their dad is a protector. Okay, so if you don't feel like you adequately fill that role, there's some things that you can do to correct that, right? Go to the gym a little bit more, lift some weights, right? Eat a little bit better. Like this is not just something you're doing too, by the way, for your physical prowess, right? Or for your ability to fight. Lifting weights is good for your mental capabilities. This is scientifically validated, right? Lifting weights is good for you. Staying in shape is good for you. Another thing that I tell men sometimes is like, look, when my wife agreed to marry me, what that meant is I'm all she gets for the rest of her life, for my life, right? I hope she doesn't kill me, right? For the rest of my life, I'm all she gets. I want her to be proud of what she's got. Right. I want to be proud of what she's got. And so I think when you look at this, not so much from the idea of, okay, I've got to be some sort of, uber warrior to be able to, no, but you should stay in good physical shape because that has a lot of benefits beyond just physical protection. Being able to know how to throw a punch or to what to do in a fight is actually going to make you a lot more confident, not just within this series of physical protection. It'll make you more confident at work. It'll make you more confident in your social relationships. So I would tell men that, look, take your physical, well-being seriously. Carve off the time that you need to be able to do that. For me, I love going to the gym in the morning. It starts my whole day off well. It gets me going. It gets the blood flowing. It gets me thinking. And by the time 10 o'clock rolls around in the morning, I've already accomplished something that day, and I think that's also very, very beneficial. The other thing I started to do is my son, who again just turned 18. A while back, he's been like, Dad, I want to do martial arts. And I'm like, okay. So I found a gym where they do Brazilian jiu-jitsu and boxing. We do MMA, and I will tell you this. Doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu at 44, not quite the same at 25. You're definitely going to want to stretch more. I learned that the hard way. But this has been a great experience for me and my son to go through something where we're rolling around, we're learning how to fight. And it's funny. He comes home one day and he tells his mom, he's like, yeah, he goes, I got to work hard. Mom, I got to get back to the gym. I got to get back to MMA. I got to do this stuff. I got to work hard. And she's like, why? He just goes, I need to know if I could take Dad in his prime. And I was thinking two things. Like, one, I think it's adorable that you think I'm still in my prime. I really appreciate that. Two, never going to happen. It's called dad strength. And our sons can't beat us. I don't know. I can't beat my dad. My dad couldn't beat my grandpa. It is what it is. If he's got to learn the hard way, so be it. But, so anyways, take that role and responsibility seriously. I don't know a single man that has decided to take that role seriously, whether it's maybe, again, just lifting weights or maybe, taking a boxing class or something like that. I don't know a single one that has regretted that decision. So, yeah.
So Nick, along those lines, I grew up with a single mom, didn't have a dad around, to kind of learn a lot of this stuff. You mentioned on a previous podcast, building a legacy is an important part of a father's job. It's kind of part of his duty to his son. Talk about building that legacy when you don't already have one. I think it's a little bit easier to jump in on one, right? If you're, King John the Ninth, it's a little bit easier to know what your legacy is.
Yeah.
How do you build a legacy from scratch when you don't necessarily have one to jump into?
Yeah. No, that's a good question. I was primarily raised by my mother. I spent the summers with my dad, but I had great grandfathers and I have a great dad. Like, I love my dad. My dad was still very influential in my life, even though I only got to see him, 3 or 4 months out of the year. It is a very, very good question, because I see a lot of men that find themselves in a situation. In fact, when I talked about legacy, I had people say, yeah, dude, I don't have that. I don't know. I have no idea who my grandfather is. As far as my father, there isn't anything that man left me that I would want to share with anybody else. And that's the part where it's important to understand that, no, you still have a legacy. It just begins with you. You're the one that starts it. You're the one that has made the decision to change the entire trajectory of a family. I mean, you think about that for a moment, because you're right. It is easy to fall into a legacy and have something established to protect and to build upon. It's like you already have something built in that you love and that you're concerned about. But for you to get here, regardless of how you got here, there is a line of human beings that goes back for thousands of years, and now it's you. And it is shameful that the people before, whoever it was, didn't do enough to actually make sure that you had a legacy to protect, or that you knew what that legacy was. But it is amazing when you think about it, that potentially hundreds or 1,000 years from now, somebody's going to look back and say, the reason why our family turned out the way it did is because somebody at some point made a decision that I'm not going to tolerate what I was given, and I'm going to make sure that my children have better. That's incredible. I mean, in some ways, if you think about it, that's just what an incredibly powerful impact to have on generations of people you will never meet. So I always tell people, if you can't look behind to something, that doesn't mean there's nothing to look forward to. And you're going to be the guy that sets the foundation for it. And that's incredible. That's incredible.
That's it. I'm motivated. I love it. It's great. Thank you.
Little twist on that question, kind of part B of that. I only have a daughter, and we probably won't have any more. How do you think that, not that I don't leave a legacy not having a son, but
yeah,
I think there's a lot of guys who, it's something I've had to wrestle with a little bit too, like, my name won't pass on and all that kind of stuff. Is that just culture? Is that just, me being stupid? Or
no, I get it.
How does that play out also? What's your take on that one?
I think it would be totally disingenuous to tell another man, especially when I have a son, that like, oh, that's no big deal. It's like, no, I get it. I totally get it. I will say this though. The most important legacy I will pass on through my children is going to be their commitment to Christ. And that's not it's not a gender specific commitment, right? I'll put it this way. There is a lot of cultural push for men, especially men that see their traditional role of wanting to build that legacy and pass it on. The son passes on the name, but your blood passes on regardless. And most importantly, the values that you taught pass on regardless. And that's the real legacy. Like ultimately, when I stand before God, he is not going to be concerned on whether or not my name passed on. He's going to be concerned on whether or not I glorified him in a way that impacted others. And I hope I live my life in such a way where I am far more concerned about what God will say to me when I arrive than what man will say about me when I leave. And so again, the importance of legacy is every bit as relevant with daughters as it is with sons. And it is every bit as important, I think, to the source of all value, which is, again, our Creator. And so I understand it. I understand it from a cultural level. I do. I think from a scriptural level, there is no less importance either way.
I agree. I just wanted to kind of flip the other side of the coin on the
Sure.
legacy piece, because it's
No,
natural for I think it's natural for people to gravitate to the sons only. And
absolutely. No,
so thank you.
I think it's really important. It was funny. My when my oldest daughter got engaged, her fiance's name is Nick. And I was teasing him. I said, well, you're going to take her name, right? And my daughter was like, we don't need two Nick Freitases. I'm like, okay, that's fair.
That's great.
Yeah.
Well, listen, what skills do you think fathers are lacking the most that are essential for raising children that are going to be capable adults, right? Because we were talking about how, like, Dustin didn't have somebody. So basically he's having to pioneer, right? He's having to fight the battles that his parents did not fight, right? And so
Yeah.
what are those essential things?
I think so. We kind of break it down into categories. You know, there's the spiritual, the emotional, the intellectual, the professional, the physical. I think in all those categories, men have responsibilities just as men, and then we have responsibilities as husbands and fathers. And so the question is that how do I develop those capabilities in each one of those categories so that I'm able to fulfill the obligations that I have, and then how am I able to pass on those skill sets to my children? And so the spiritual development, I think, is the most important because it's fundamental and foundational to everything else. And so knowing what you believe and why you believe it will help make sense of everything else that you do. And so if there's something off with that, if there's something wrong with that, it will typically ripple effect into the other categories as well. You know, the emotional and the intellectual side are pretty obvious, right? Like emotionally, men should be able to project power. We should be able to intimidate when necessary, but we should also be able to project tenderness toward the people that we love. There's a side of me that my wife and kids will never see. There's a side of me that has only been seen by a very select few people in Iraq, right? There's another side of me that my wife and kids see that nobody else will see. They might get glimpses of it, but not the way it is for them. And so that sort of emotional maturity is really important. And I'll talk about one of the biggest areas where I have failed in this is that I have a temper, and that temper doesn't result in, like, you know, violence or aggression toward my family or anything like that.
Sure.
What it typically does is it causes me to, you know, not operate as effectively as I could. And one of the primary sources of that anger is printers. I don't know what it is, but printers just deserve all of our disrespect and animosity. And there's nothing you can do to a printer that would make me feel bad. But things like that, developing that sort of emotional maturity to be able to be in control of yourself and your thoughts. And again, this is a biblical command, right? To capture every thought. That's really important. The intellectual side, I think men, all of us have different interests, and all of us have different kind of things that we go toward, but developing a kind of broad intellectual capability. So there's going to be things that you specialize in, and those are going to be things that you're really interested in. I was interested in critical thinking and political philosophy and economic policy, and so I spent a lot of time doing that. As I get older, there's other things that I've gotten really interested. I got really interested in gardening when COVID hit, and all of a sudden the shelves were bare. I'm like, holy crap, I never want my family to have to be completely dependent on Walmart to be able to feed. So I'm going to learn about this. And then I started learning about other things. And so I would just say that the key to intellectual capacity is to have a very, very good foundation within critical thinking and an understanding of truth. And then to never grow bored of learning new things.
Yes.
It's a really exciting process. I think one of the biggest pet peeves I have with some elements of public school. And I know I'm not trying to bash on everybody in the public school system. I'm not trying to bash on that. It's just a system that I have a problem with, is that I think sometimes it robs of our curiosity and our passion for learning, because it's so focused on do this for this test, and then, here's your grade. As opposed to just recognizing that we live in an incredible world and there's all kinds of ways to educate yourself, especially now. So just never lose that hunger for education. And when your kids start to learn something that may be different than what you ever did, like my dad never cared about baseball. He learned about baseball because I cared about baseball. And then some of our greatest memories growing up with my dad are watching baseball games that he never cared about until I came along with an interest. The professional capability, right? We have to provide. And it's, this whole, go chase your dreams. Go chase what can feed your family, right? And get that as close to your dream as possible. And then develop the skills and the capabilities to be able to, again, love the work that you do, but understand that there's value in any work that allows you to feed your family and take care of them and provide for them. And then on the physical side, right, just keeping yourself in shape, because because again, if you want to be at your peak professionally and physically and emotionally or relationally, the relationship is a big part of that emotional and intellectual component, and spiritually, well, then it does require you to take care of the body as well. And so find the things that you enjoy doing that provide you that capability. But I think there's a lot of good mentorship out there right now that you don't even necessarily. I think it's important. You guys have a core group of people right now, right? You're in 4 different states?
We are. Yep.
That is correct.
Yep. And you guys, for various reasons, respect one another. You bring different experiences. You bring different things to the table. Like all of that is, I think, another thing that is really important for men is to have that core group, right? This is my go to war group, right? These are the guys that I can call them up at 2:00 in the morning and say, man, I need you here. And they're going to show up. I think that's really important for men as well. So yeah, those are just some of the things that I would say as get those foundations in first, get them solid. And then start to build out and just develop those capabilities over the things that you can control. We focus a lot on things we can't control, and it makes people depressed. And a lot of times it actually drives them into stopping the focus on the things that they could actually make better.
Yeah, and that's actually kind of all tied to masculinity, I feel like. And one of the things I wanted to pick your brain on was just masculinity and the idiot who decided to marry that word with toxic, because there are toxic people. Yeah. And there are masculine and feminine women, and men. And it's like, I just want to hear your thoughts on the word masculinity and what do you think it means as a father and how that can kind of tie.
Well, okay. So let's be as generous as possible to the toxic masculinity crew. All right, let's just be as generous as possible. Let's assume that what they meant is that there are certain traits associated with masculinity, which if used in certain ways can be toxic. Okay, I got no problem with that. Now let's do femininity, right? Like if you want to break it down according to these categories, that's absolutely fine. The thing that I like to tell people is that, okay, what are masculine traits? Competitiveness, aggression, a capacity and capability for physical violence. Okay. Everything I just mentioned would be predominantly associated with masculinity, but they're all morally neutral. In that capacity in and of itself, they're morally neutral until something happens. So if my capacity for physical violence manifests itself in stealing someone's purse, yes, that is a evil manifestation of that masculine trait. If it manifests itself in me stopping the guy that stole the purse and giving it back to the nice old lady that had it stolen from her, that is a positive manifestation of a masculine trait. So in the problem that we get into nowadays is that whenever a man demonstrates what might be considered a more stoic quality, or again, that competitiveness or whatnot, they don't label the negative manifestation of it toxic. They label the trait itself as toxic. And then here's what ends up happening. The moment you say, well, okay, what if I help the girl get it? Well, that's not what I'm talking about. No, you don't get to do that. They do this all the time. They talk in incredibly broad terms And then when you call them on it, they narrow it back down to the thing that nobody disagreed with in the first place. And it's like, okay, what do you really want here? And I think what some people really want is the feminization of men. They see men as the problem. And you'll hear this sometimes. Okay, yeah, fine. There's some good men that protect women, but who do they protect them from? Other men. So see, the problem is still men. And I like to say, oh yeah, you're right. Because if we had a civilization comprised exclusively of women, there'd be no violence or conflict then, right? Oh yeah, no such thing as female aggression. Like, just because men have the capacity to engage in physical violence in a way that most women don't, and so therefore it manifests itself that way in reality, doesn't mean if you took men out of the picture, there'd no longer be physical aggression anymore. Like, oh my gosh. So part of it is just, getting people to understand, like, look, put aside all these culturally stupid terms. Like I fight against them because I think they're ridiculous and I think they're perverting the whole process. By the same token, I don't like some people in what they call the manosphere that have now created this idea that no, going out there and having a high body count and having as many beautiful women as possible and doing this and, forget, that's what being a man is all about, because all the top G's and all the kings, they had harems and they had cars and they had this. Yeah. And if you want to know what took down most of those top G's, it was having harems, and it was,
absolutely.
Yeah,
so
they were bankrupt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really.
What we should be projecting right now, because that's the backlash that's coming. They told a whole generation of young men, there's something wrong with you. And now we've got some men coming up going, there ain't nothing wrong with you, man. You need to double down on all of those attributes. And the problem is that a lot of people, especially within the Christian environment, I'm sorry, but if you're 125 pounds soaking wet youth pastor in skinny jeans is the guy that is trying to convince this is what biblical masculinity looks like. That ain't getting it done, man. That ain't getting it done, right? We need the sort of men that can be the tender warriors, that can say that, no, your objective as man is not to go out there and have a bunch of meaningless trysts with a bunch of women. No, your job as a man is to go out there and find that woman that you love, that you passionately respect, that you can build a family around, so that you can build the sort of men that civilization rely on. You can build the sort of women that civilization rely on. That's what your job is to do. And in order to do that, you have to be capable. Right? I want the dude going out there and telling everybody else, telling all these other young men, go out there and do all these things, which we know are immoral and self-destructive. When I show up in the same room with that dude, I want him to be scared of me. Right? Not because I'm going to do something harmful to him.
He will be.
Absolutely.
Because it's all an act, right? It's all projection.
Yeah, I want him to be able to look over and be like, that dude, okay.
That's a real killer.
Yeah, so it's the sort of thing where if we're going to be saying this is what biblical masculinity is, again, biblical masculinity is not like, oh, okay, no. Biblical masculinity is I'm respectful to women because I understand that they're beautifully and wonderfully created in the image of God. I'm respectful to my wife, both for her own sake and also because I'm teaching in the way I treat my wife. I treat my son how he should treat his wife, and I treat my daughter how she should expect to be treated by her future husband. Right? These are the things that I do. And when we say it, we better say it with both passion and conviction because it works, but we also better be able to defend it, not only intellectually, but we should be able to defend it physically. We don't want young Christian men to look at all of their, male Christian mentors and think, okay, yeah, what they're saying might be true, but I'm pretty sure a strong gust of wind could take them out. Right? Like, no, be formidable. John Lovell's got a great book on this called Warrior Poet. And John Lovell is, just really massive amount of respect for that guy. Another guy that I really admire is Victor Marx. You want to talk about a guy that went through some stuff, but is just one of these guys that exudes this idea of, that gentle warrior. And that doesn't mean he's always gentle. It means he's gentle with the people that deserve gentility, and he's warrior with the people that deserve warrior, and nobody's confusing it, right? So that's what I would say on that. It's like we got to show we can acknowledge that there's certain traits that are both masculine and can have really, really bad manifestations, and the way that you counter those is with the positive manifestations of masculinity, and that's what God commands us to be.
But Nick, I'm confused. I was told that Justin Trudeau is the ideal male.
Oh my God. Oh man, I don't know. Oh gosh, there's so many jokes that just came to mind, and none of them are appropriate. Gosh.
We'll have to save them for
Oh,
Yeah.
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 So one of the questions we always ask our dads that come on, when you close your eyes and you stop and you think about a core memory or your favorite fatherhood story, what is that you envision there?
Oh gosh. Okay. I'm gonna probably gonna have to go with 2, if you don't mind. And this, this is kind of crazy. My dad was a homicide detective with the LAPD, and again, I only got to see my dad about 3 months out of the year, and but I would go down there with the summers, and every once in a while I'd be like, "You want to come into work with me?" Yeah. And you understand, my dad at the time was like 5'7". He was kind of a bigger guy, but he was 5'7". He wasn't real tall. And I always kind of knew my dad as being kind of funny and sarcastic and the whole deal. And he definitely had a serious side. Like I knew my dad was, a real man, but I saw the tender side. Right. And we go into the station. And I think this is when he was working, I think South Bureau Homicide. And we're sitting down and he goes, and I'm just kind of sitting at his desk. Is he want to look at some crime scene books? Like, yeah, sure. Good father-son time, right? And he goes, hey, I'm going to get a cup of coffee. I'm like, oh, I got to go to the bathroom. He goes, oh yeah, come with me. So he grabs the pot, and he's walking over to the coffee maker, and he shows me where the bathroom is. And as I walk back out, he's got this pot of coffee, and he's sitting there, and there's this guy set up on the bench, handcuffed, tats everywhere. Pretty sure he was probably MS-13. And I kind of whispered to my dad, Dad, what do those tattoos mean? He goes, what? He looks at me and goes, oh. And he goes over to the guy, starts pointing the tattoo, and the guy starts to lift his head up, and he goes, get your head down. And I was like, Dad, it's cool. Like, I'm not trying to make anybody mad. He's like, get your head down. He's like, okay, so this tattoo right here means this, and this tattoo is with this gang over here. And it was one of those things that doesn't seem like a huge deal, but I mean, here I am, 44 years old, telling you about this story because in that moment, I got a glimpse of the man the bad guys see. And it was like, whoa, okay. My dad's amazing. A badass.
Yeah, that's amazing.
And part of, yeah. But so that was one story. The other thing that was really formative for me growing up, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention it, was all of the times going over to my dad's house, because my grandfather lived 5 miles away from me. And so I would go over and we would watch John Wayne marathons on TNT and USA and whatnot. And then we go into the den because Grandpa would want to smoke his pipe. And he would tell me stories of running away from home when he was 16 to join the Navy during World War II, and working as a logger and working as a firefighter. And again, my grandfather, Bill Freitas, was one of just the most beloved guys. Like everyone just loved Bill. And again, he's like 5'6", right? But it was one of those things where he did a lot of mentoring for me without ever like us intentionally saying, oh, okay, we're going to mentor now. No, he was just there whenever I needed him, and willing to share those stories, and there at the games when my dad couldn't be. He's the one that picked out my wife. When we had a car wash at the high school, and he pulled up because he was going to support his grandson, and Tina was there, and he goes, Nick, you need to date that girl.
Nice.
You need to date that girl. I'm like, Dad or Grandpa, she's not interested in me, way out of my league. He's like, no, that's the one you need to date. And it was funny because when we did start dating and when we got engaged, this is the other side of my grandpa. There was one time where, again, my grandpa's been rooting for this girl and me to get together. And Tina and I got engaged, and like she gave me a kiss, and my grandpa's just looking at her with this look like, ugh. And she looks at him, she goes, what's the matter, Papa Bill? And he goes, oh, honey, nothing makes you sick.
I love it.
It was so both of those men, my other grandfather too, Papa John, was really influential as well. But I got to see that tenderness of my grandfathers, and the wisdom and the stories. And then with my dad, again, I got a dad that, really worked hard to be involved, even though he lived so far away. But man, I will never forget the moment I saw, I'll never forget the moment I saw what the bad guys saw. And it made a huge impression on me, and it made me thankful. Sometimes people treat this like, well, gosh, weren't you scared? No, nope, because I never got that look. But
Right.
it made me feel safe that if anybody was ever going to hurt me, they were going to get that look.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
That's a great distinction. Well, thanks for sharing those stories. Those are awesome. Like to switch it up with a little bit of an odd question for you. So if you could spend a day with anyone living or dead, who would it be, and why is it Thomas Sowell?
So living, it would be, okay. Can we just?
I was
mainly
just joking. I know you're
right now. Can we all agree right now that we're not going to say the typical answers with, Jesus, Moses? All right. So, living, yeah, it would be Thomas Sowell. I don't fanboy about celebrities. I don't I've met some pretty important people, some pretty powerful people, some pretty famous people. And I'm never the type to go over and ask for an autograph or a picture or anything like that. It's oh, that's cool. That's pretty. If Thomas Sowell walked in that door right now, this would be over. Right. And I would be fangirling.
Understandable.
Oh my God.
You would not believe. And for the next, for as long as he would give me, I would just sit there and ask him questions and be taking notes and Hamilton, can we film this? Right. I admire that man so much for the work that he does and the intellect that he is, that would be, yeah, Thomas Sowell would be, oh gosh, that would be pretty incredible.
Yeah.
Someone dead. Gosh, I'd have to think about that. Okay, it's always hard. You don't want to leave anybody out, right?
Right.
Frederick Bastiat, and this kind of goes to my interest in political philosophy and whatnot. And it allows me to share the name of someone that isn't, is commonly known within the sphere. But Frederick Bastiat wrote a book called The Law, and he wrote a lot of other books as well. He was in the legislature in France in the 1800s, and died fairly young. But his book, The Law, I used to buy that book 100 copies at a time and hand it out whenever I would go talk to people. Because he did such an excellent job of breaking down complex concepts in a way that were easy to understand, incredibly relevant, not only for the 1840s France, but for today. And he's another person that I would just love to be able to sit there and have a discussion with, because again, his intellect was just incredible. And I would love to not only ask him questions, I would just sit there and be like, how would you respond to this? How would you respond to this? How would you respond to this? And then I would write all of that down. And then when he disappeared from our meeting, I would say, look at all these great responses I came up with. So
I love it.
But yeah, that's two people. I mean, obviously, if we were going back into biblical times and whatnot, there's David. David is one I'd really want to talk to. Joshua as well. Yeah, because I think a lot of men kind of resonate with David. We want to be that warrior. We want to be a man after God's own heart, but we also just wonder how, on some of the stuff he did, how could you?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I guess I've screwed up this whole thing because I listed off 5.
No, that's perfect.
No,
That's perfect.
I was kind of just giving you as a joke because I know you're such a huge fan of Thomas Sowell. So
Yeah.
The real question was, I know you're a pretty funny guy. Your shorts and stuff are absolutely hilarious. My wife and I will actually just sit there and scroll them pretty often. It's pretty funny. We get a good laugh out of them. But humor, I think a lot of dads err too far on stoicism.
Yeah.
What's your take on humor and how important it is for dads to just sometimes just have a laugh and be goofy with your kids and stuff? Because if you're all serious all the time, it's not realistic, right? Real life isn't that way. Some things you just got to laugh at. So
You're going to do
kind of get your
you're going to do damage to your kids if you're serious all the time.
Right.
And I mean that very sincerely. There are a lot of dads that think they want to play this like purely stoic role, and I'm I just can't say they can never see me cry, and I can't say I love you, and like you're gonna do damage to your kids. Nothing about that's biblical. My one of the things I really loved about I love about my dad and loved about my grandfathers was how funny they were. I mean, they were just the wit and the sarcasm was so quick. When my when my mother-in-law first saw my dad and I together and saw us interact, she went over to Tina and said, are they okay? Like, do they not have a good relationship? And Tina's like, no, they're like super close. It's like, why are they so mean to each other? And it was because my dad and I joke about this all the time. Like to this day, when we, call each other up or whatnot, like it's a series of very, very witty, sarcastic jokes toward one another, but we still tell each other, love you too, love you, Dad. And we mean it, right? We mean it. So I think the humor, and I think to some degree, healthy sarcasm is actually important. I think it actually teaches kids how to interact in kind of a funny way, how to not take themselves too seriously, how to sometimes not take, bad situations too seriously. Like, how do you not to be irreverent, right? And not to be disrespectful, but at the same token, a little bit of laughter can actually bring a whole lot of calm and a whole lot of joy to a situation. And so all of our kids, I am 80% of the time with my kids, I'm more like funny and jovial and sarcastic and they love it. And they've all developed a very, very healthy, funny sarcasm as well. That again is not insulting. It's not mean spirited most of the time, but I think it's really important. No, I think humor is critical because it's one of the ways. It's also one of the ways that dads can kind of show tenderness without feeling overly vulnerable. Because again, we don't want to appear weak to our kids. We need to be strong for them. And jokes and joking around with them and teasing a little bit in a way that's safe and fun is, I think, incredibly healthy. So no, we do that a lot. Of like, if you were to come over to our house for dinner, it would be nonstop us kind of like joking with one another, like, really friendly, like jabs at one another and things like that. And when my future son-in-law first came over, it takes a little getting used to. I remember my daughter was actually in a car accident, and it wasn't a bad one. But she called us up and she was shook up a little bit. And so I went and I picked her up, dealt with everything, as soon as I came up, gave her a hug. Are you okay? Is there anything you need? Are you sure? Okay. Went over, talked to the sheriff's deputy, talked to the, other car. Is everyone okay over here? Do you need anything? We came back. Sweetheart, do you want to talk about it? How do you feel? Okay. And just like helping her kind of work through, this is what happened. I'm like, okay, yeah, no, honey, stuff like this happens, the whole deal. So like for the first 2 hours of my interaction with her after this happened, it was all tenderness, concern, empathy, sympathy, the whole deal. Her boyfriend comes over, and the first thing I say to him is like, you better watch your girlfriend. She was kissing a steering wheel earlier, and it's just a little weird, right? And he was like kind of horrified at first, and Lily kind of explained to him like, for the first 2 hours, my dad was just sitting there and anything I needed and holding me when he got there and the whole deal. This is his way of letting everyone know that everyone's safe, everyone's okay. Nobody's mad, nobody's angry. It's going to be all right. Stuff like this happens. And, but yeah, at first he was like, man, that was kind of a jerk thing to say. But, and again, she did not have any injury. So I wasn't making fun of any, like, we didn't have to go to the hospital. We drove straight home. Right. So I think the humor is really important.
Man, that's awesome. Final question here before we wrap up. What is the best piece of advice somebody has given you as a father?
Oh gosh. I'm gonna have to come up with a list of answers to questions like this, because whenever I'm asked, I can never think of
one
something.
Of the best.
Yeah.
Or maybe reverse it and just say, what is some advice you would give to a new father or to any father? There you
Well,
go.
I'll put it this way, both as a father and as a husband. I'm trying to remember who was the first person to tell me this, because it's something I've told my kids now, and it's something I told. Dang, it's it's something I told the man that's going to marry my daughter. um, it was essentially that if you don't love Christ most, you're never going to be able to love your wife, your kids. Or when I told it to him, you're never going to be able to love my daughter the way she deserves. And for people that don't share my worldview, that probably sounds cliche. I cannot emphasize how foundational it is to everything else I've talked about today. So that would be it. If you can't love Christ the way he deserves, you're never going to be able to love your wife or your children the way they deserve.
God, that's good. That's
No
beautiful.
greater love than this, right? Yeah, beautiful. Love it.
Yeah, I'm writing that one down. That's probably what I'm going to say.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that one. Yeah, and I agree wholeheartedly. Last couple of years for me have been years of a lot of growth just in every aspect of my life, but mainly with my walk with him. And so much of what was wrong in our marriage was because I wasn't pursuing Christ well enough and making that fix. It's amazing how a lot of problems have sorted themselves out.
Yep.
So that's probably the best advice that you could give in that scenario. So thank you for that one. Nick, where can people find you? Not that that's a hard place to find you, but for those who may not know,
yeah,
where's the best place?
we made it pretty easy. Nick J. Freitas. I know Freitas is not the easiest last name to spell, but if you Freitas, anybody types that into Google or whatnot, Instagram, YouTube. We put a lot of time into our YouTube channel lately, where we've tried to share some meaningful experiences on being a husband, being a father, on our YouTube channel, which again is just Nick J. Freitas. Our podcast, Making the Argument, we do 2 live shows a week. We're probably going to be adjusting some of that in the future, because I've got to go into legislative session here in January. But those are the best places to follow us on social media.
Awesome. And then I just wanted to kick it over to you for any closing thoughts or comments you wanted to leave with the audience.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. I mean, the biggest thing I'll say is, a lot of the things that I talk about, I had somebody that's not a fan of mine tell me I was being arrogant in some of the things that I say, and the confidence from which I speak of it. And I guess the one thing I would just want to make sure that people understood is that, man, the confidence is entirely into just seeing things work. There is none of what I talk about or my experience and whatnot do I ever mean to be boastful or arrogant, as if I've got everything figured out or have had it all figured out or whatnot. When I say there by the grace of God, I absolutely mean it. And I have been so blessed to have a wife that has really just prayed for me and worked with me in this marriage in a way that is just so meaningful and precious. So the experiences that we share, both the successes and the failures, are intended to come from a deep place of humility and recognizing that, man, I so much of this stuff I cannot take credit for. I'm really blessed to have been taught well by people that taught me, and blessed in those moments where a different decision could have been made, on decisions where I made good ones, and thankfully surrounded by people that helped me learn from the times when I didn't make the right decision. And so that's all I would say to kind of close it out. But thank you all very much for having me, and thank you all very much for what you do.
Well, thank you, Nick. It's been a real pleasure. And I'll speak for all of us. We're thankful for your example. I think you are setting a great example for men in the country. From any walk of life, really. And like we talked about, a lot of these cultural issues start with us, in our own families, or young men looking to start families one day. So thanks for being a good example and kind of using the voice and platform that you have for good. And I know that your series on your YouTube channel, about being a father and about being a man were like some of the best videos I've watched in a long time. So I
Absolutely.
appreciate the effort you put into those because I think they're going to do a lot of good. And yeah, it's just been a pleasure to learn from you and to have you on. So thank you so much, and thank you to your wife for being such a great support. And congrats to all your kids hitting those milestones this year. And I hope the wedding with your daughter is outstanding.
No, thank you all very much.
All right, well, dads, enough talk. Let's get climbing. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Present Fathers Podcast. Make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Spotify to catch all of our amazing episodes. We will see you in the next one.